Hey, there we are.
Aloha, Charlie. Aloha,
Aloha.
everybody.
Hey, everybody.
Welcome to Facebook Live with Mel and Charlie. Tonight is Monday, August
Third.
3rd, I think. Huh? Is it the 3rd today, Charles?
Yes, it is.
All right. All right. Well, everybody, thank you for joining us tonight. Let me get my stuff all set up here.
Hey, while you're doing that, Mel, I'd like to send a big shout out to all of the people in Hawaii and around the world. Thank you so much for your warm congratulations and comments to Brother Mel and I on our the article that was posted on us in Civil Beat. We want to say mahalo to you. That was very, very kind. But you know what, folks? It wouldn't have happened without you folks. So you folks are part of that, is part of that as well. So we want to say thank you. I want to say thank you.
Yeah, that was pretty cool, I guess. Yeah, that was that was nice. Um,
Don't get too enthused now. No.
the thing was seen by people on the mainland as well, and in fact was ironic. One of the ladies that messaged me was originally from Honolulu, related to the proposals in Kailua on Oahu, and she reads the Civil Beat, and she lives in Arizona. So she checked out the page and went and saw that we have our guest tonight from Arizona. So she's stoked. She'll be on tonight
Mm-hmm.
if she's not already. It is a 3 hour. Arizona is 3 hour difference, so it is.
10 o'clock. Good.
It's going to be 10 o'clock for our friends in Arizona, which is it's late. It's late. Our guest is coming all the way from Arizona as well, and I think you folks all saw the little promo we put up. Um, Doctor, do you
Angry
remember
doctor.
the Angry Doctor? The Angry Doctor. He's known as the Angry Doctor because he has been on CNN and all these mainland news channels, and he's honest, he's straight, and I put out the disclaimer or the warning that our show is uncensored, and he's gonna speak to us tonight straight from the heart. So if some rough language offends you, you might want to put the kids away, and we're gonna have a very good heart to heart discussion with someone who's on the line, someone who is in the field, in a hospital that is seeing incredible increases in COVID patients. So we're gonna let him go tonight. We're gonna let him share. I'm not gonna steal his thunder, but if any of you saw him on TV, you know exactly what I'm talking about. I did post three of his videos on my page, some YouTube videos, but he's got a ton of them. He's a very sought after doctor for some of our news channels. And I want to thank you, Charlie, for making the connection and getting him on board. Uh, these are the kinds of people that, I mean, we're competing, believe it or not, with CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, all of these mainland
The Rachel
cable.
Maddow show. Yeah, Rachel
Yeah,
Maddow. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, all these cable networks. And um, yeah, that's who we're competing with. And, they all have one thing in common. They want to help. And if this doctor from Arizona can help Hawaii based on his experiences, real life experiences, not third party experiences, but real life experiences, we definitely want him on the show. So we're looking forward to it. Sorry, I was eating sunflower seeds. So I get some of those little kernels stuck in my mouth. It'll
No
get out.
problem.
Make sure it's done before the doc comes on.
Well, folks, today was again, depending on how you look, we knew that there were some hiccups with the testing over at the test sites, not the test sites, but the labs. So I guess the rest of the tests came in today to add on to what was previously reported on Saturday and Sunday. And today we hit an all-time high, 207. The way I look at it, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mel, if I were to take that in conjunction with the other test, if it would have come out, the other tests the 80 and the 47 and the 80 something, we're basically looking at tests over 300 plus for the weekend of infected
Yeah.
cases.
You
So,
know, again, I think, and we'll ask the doctor to expound on these numbers because I know I see a lot of posts throughout the day about people. Again, and I'm not going to get into the recovery issue, but what we look at is the number, the percentage of tests that come out positive, the percentage of tests that have positive results, and that is a key number. I don't care how many tests you give, but the trend can be tracked based on the number of those test results that come back positive. And right now, this last one was 6%. This was, you know, taking all those mistakes or whatever into, they took all the number of tests and the number of positives, you divide one into the other, you end up with 6%. And we'll ask the doctor about 6%, but it's high by all what I've read and all of the doctors that I've seen and heard talk about. 6% is high, 4% is high, and we're at six. We're actually up at 7% before the adjustment, but with the adjustment made, we are at 6%. Now that is high. So, you know, there's some people that are going to try to minimize this, and I respect them. They don't want to, you know, they consider these types of facts as fear mongering, but it's not. These are facts. These are the actual facts as it is reported. The numbers don't lie, and when you have a 6% result of positives, that's it's time to pay attention. And you know, the governor today at his press conference, they're still waiting. They're still waiting to see more numbers before they take any kind of action. I know Honolulu just dropped their indoor outdoor gathering capacity to 10. I believe Kauai is still at 10 for indoors, but it's still 100 for outdoors. Maui is 10 for indoors and outdoors. And we're going to see more of that if these numbers don't change. And the governor seems to think that, his words were that out of the 17,000 inter-island flights that were made in the last week, there was only a handful of those that passed on the virus. Only a handful. So it's not, doesn't warrant uh, reinstating the inter-island quarantine. So, but they're still looking into the numbers. They're still reading their reports. So, yeah.
I'll, I'll share with you one thought. And for you viewers out there, you can dissect it however you want to dissect it. There was just a handful. I get it. But remember when this pandemic started? It just started with a handful coming to Hawaii, and look where it's now. Okay,
Well,
so so
we've heard,
let's think
we
about that.
we we heard the state say we got to watch out once we start seeing the 100 per day. And you
They're
know,
moving the
we
goalposts now, right?
yeah, exactly.
They're moving the goalposts.
Yeah.
So so the days of kicking a 20-yard field goal, we're gonna have to probably kick about a 60-yard field goal since they're moving the post so far on the field.
The
But
problem is that
nevertheless,
they're moving the post after the guy kicked the ball.
yep.
The ball is in the air, and then they're moving the goalpost. So
Or they're moving the hoop when the shot is already being taken, and
exactly.
they're moving the basketball hoop someplace else. But nevertheless, all kidding aside, uh, am I worried? Yeah, I'm not gonna lie. I'm not gonna lie. You know, I'm thinking about. I'll give you an example, Mel. I'm thinking about my good buddy. He's a respiratory therapist here at KVMH on the island of Kauai. His name is Andre Johnson. You know, I keep on saying between him and Elliot DeMello, the ER physician who basically saved me. But when I went in for the first time, ever being hospitalized, other than taking out my tonsils at a young age, in 2011, I went in for a double pneumonia. I spent nearly 2 weeks at KVMH, but I remember that sick feeling of drowning. And I remember when they said, "Oh, Mr. Iona, we have to take you to get some x rays." They didn't come to the room. And just for me to sit up or for me to go to the bathroom just to take a shower, I remember crying out to my wife and I said, "Honey, I think I'm going to die because I just wasn't getting enough air." Was so bad that I actually had them take my bed out of the room and bring me a recliner because I couldn't sleep lying down. It felt like I was drowning. And I can only imagine these people that suffering from COVID that have that feeling of drowning in real time. And it to the point that your head starts to throb because you're basically hyperventilating because you're struggling. You are struggling. And I went through that. And I didn't have COVID. I just had pneumonia. Just imagine what these patients that do have COVID, what they're going through. I don't ever want to go through that again.
All right. Well, we have Dr. Murtaza Akhter that is ringing on the door. There he
There
is.
he is.
He's connecting to audio.
Yes,
I
there
don't
he
know. I
is.
don't know, Charles. I don't know if he's ever been on a show like this. This ain't CNN. This ain't MSNBC.
This is
Um,
this is the
oh,
highlight of my career. I've been waiting for this moment. Thank you guys for having me.
Well,
Doc,
aloha and welcome.
Aloha back. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. I'm honored to, and I really appreciate everything you guys are doing. This is amazing for you guys to be trying to get the word out to the community in your own time. So very impressive, guys. Very impressed.
Thank you.
well, Doc, real quick, that's Charlie. The Hawaiian is Charlie. Well, if you cannot tell the difference, the older one is Charlie.
Oh, here
I'm
we
Mel.
go. Here we go.
I already know I'm going to enjoy this.
We started off about 4 months ago with all we wanted to do was inform and educate people to please follow the rules. That's all. Wear a mask, social distance, wash your hands, blah, blah, blah. That's how it started. It grew into this show that a lot of our leaders, lieutenant governors and senators and Congress people, we've just had a ton of people come on to basically share and just, again, to inform and educate. We have not, for the most part, I think a lot of the people here in Hawaii are listening and are following the rules, but we still are having some difficulty with some people that believe it's not as serious as it is. Charlie, came across yourself. You have a bunch of fans here, by the way, on Kauai, because as
Yes.
soon as we posted
They already
this
knew
thing
you.
on Facebook, the comments started coming in, emails. Mel, wow, we really love this guy.
Is
Blah
that
blah blah. How
right?
did you guys get him? So we want you to help us spread the word. But you are coming from an area that is considered a hot zone. You are coming from an area you have seen what many of us hope to never see. So I'm not gonna steal any of your thunder, Doc. If we're gonna turn it over to you, if you could give us a brief introduction, tell us a little bit about Arizona, where you work, where you're at today as far as COVID and the tragic cases and how you got to where you're at today. And I'm going to shut my mouth. We'll get some questions as we go along.
Well, again, thank you, Mel and Charlie, for having me. And again, I'm very impressed with the work you guys are doing. It is very important to get the word out. And honestly, I think it goes a long way when they can hear from voices like yours. I probably have been talking into echo chambers for too long. So I'm really glad to be on this platform and be discussing, sort of interactively with you guys who are well known in the community, but whomever else is listening as well. So yeah, I'm in Arizona. I'm in the city of Phoenix in particular, and Maricopa County in particular in Arizona got hit really hard. And as you can imagine, there are places throughout the world where there are very few people and therefore there are fewer cases. But the cities that are denser and people are living closer together, whether because of poverty or otherwise, that's where the virus can transmit really quickly. And that's sort of what we saw happen here. For a while in April, we were doing quite well. So, we're hearing horror stories from New York in March and early April. And we'd already heard stories about other countries. So we really went on sort of lockdown mode where the governor had stay-at-home orders as much as possible. And honestly, the volumes in the emergency department were so low that we were concerned that people weren't coming aggressively enough. We were like, are people hiding their illnesses? Because this has gotten really low. So at the moment, I was very proud of Arizonans and of Phoenicians for doing their part of distancing, staying home, and the hospital volumes were actually quite manageable. We were, I wouldn't say twiddling our thumbs because there were still patients coming in, but at the same time, it was a lot quieter than we were used to. We had enough PPE. Granted, we were conserving it. We're being smart, and we're doing everything possible to, save it and reuse it as necessary. We'd already broken up our zones into the right zones to triage COVID from non-COVID patients, but the volumes were really looking quite good. We went into May. The governor decided, he said he was going to look at the data before releasing the stay-at-home orders. He was going to look at 3 weekends worth of data. But after 1 weekend, he decided, you know what, we're going to release the stay-at-home orders. And all of us were like, what's going on? Complete coincidence that the president was in town at the same time. I'm sure that was coincidental. And next thing you know, the stay-at-home orders were slowly released. And then, as you know from the news, a few weeks after that, Arizona got blasted. And so, it got blasted at almost exactly the time you would predict. All the health experts have been looking at the data when you do stay-at-home orders versus when you release them, how soon after that will the hit happen? And that's almost exactly what happened. Our waves hit basically 3 weeks later or so, maybe a month later. And then the ERs were like, it was like a whole new world. I'd been off for a couple of days. I came back in the ER and I was like, what is happening here? And it just becomes sort of normal for us to get a lot of COVID patients in addition to the non-COVID patients. Remember, they didn't go away. It's not like heart attacks stopped happening. So those are still happening while the COVID patients were still coming in. And we became the hotspot of the country, most cases per capita, the highest positivity rate in the country. And some of those numbers stayed that way for weeks. Now they are beginning to get better. They're not good, but they're beginning to get better. And now the fear is I don't want people to relax, because if you get vigilant, and you guys are sort of seeing this in Hawaii, if people start saying, you know what, we're okay, we've been okay, we'll continue to be okay, and if people let their guard down, what happens to us can happen elsewhere and can happen to us again. I mean, there are multiple cities who have had second waves, third waves across the country, and that's partially what the virus does. But also, as people let loose their guard, that's what happens. The virus spreads. Even if we're bored of it or tired of it, that doesn't mean the virus is. And so anyway, while Arizona's looking better right now, the real fear is will it get worse again if people let the guard down, and I'm hoping they don't. And I'm hoping other people can at least learn a lesson from us. We thought we'd learned something from New York, and we did okay for a while. But then again, we let our guard down, and all the lessons that we'd learned were lost. And now a lot of lives were lost as well.
Wow.
So Doc, you obviously right there on the front line. I watched a few of your videos last night, and those videos were probably done right in the middle of those really, really bad times where you witness a lot of bad things. Typically, COVID patients come into your hospital, they're treated. How are they treated? Early intervention, I think, is key. Is that what you're seeing? That the earlier you can get to these patients and treat them, the better the success rate. And what is the mortality rate, or what was your mortality rate, or what is it as it relates to the positive? How many of the positives actually passed away? Is there a percentage?
Yeah, so these are all great questions. So your first question was about what was I think it was about what was I seeing in the ER in terms of, I think it was early treatment, and does early treatment help? And so couple things. For one, if you've got a mild cough and mild symptoms, then I'm not saying rush to the ER, because early treatment is better for everything. But if you're feeling otherwise okay, potentially exposing yourself may not be the way to go. That probably is better if you're young, healthy, breathing okay. I think it's best to stay home. And I think people knew that with, for example, the sometimes we're getting even common cold patients in years past, and we're like, why are you in the ER? But if you're feeling otherwise okay, the important thing to do was to distance, wash hands, stay away from people. That's regardless of whether you have symptoms, but especially if you have symptoms. So, but for the people who are particularly sick, and again, this is for COVID and otherwise, early treatment always leads to better outcomes. And the reason I say for COVID and non-COVID is because when the hospitals got backed up, when we were really backed up, and we still are, but we were really backed up a couple of weeks ago, the patients who came into the ER were waiting in the emergency department for hours and hours on end. And that wasn't just COVID patients. In fact, it was even worse for patients who had, say, an abdominal infection or urosepsis, or whatever the case may be, CHF, congestive heart failure. Again, these diseases didn't magically disappear, right? These are chronic diseases in a lot of cases. Those patients would be sitting in the ER waiting for hours on end. Now, we do everything we can in the emergency department, and our colleagues on internal medicine and the ICU, they're coming down and rounding on those patients. But the emergency department is built for emergencies. Once those patients are stabilized, they're supposed to be moved up to the floors that can better manage them. So you can imagine if, for example, the cath lab has to have a delay or any intervention has to have a delay because everything is delayed, well, then it's not just the COVID patients who are affected. If anything, the non-COVID patients are even more affected. If your heart attack care is delayed, if your gallbladder care, infection care is delayed, because we know earlier intervention and earlier treatment and earlier fluids and early antibiotics, et cetera, for whatever the case may be, leads to better outcomes. If those things are delayed, we try to do everything as quickly as we can in the ER, but if things aren't quite on time or there's a little bit of a delay, which is bound to be if there are backups in the hospital, then you can imagine what effect that has on outcomes, not just on COVID patients, but also on non-COVID patients. So I think it's very important for people to realize that, especially as I get into the next question that you asked, which is about mortality, is that COVID mortality and COVID sicknesses and hospitals backing up doesn't just affect COVID patients. Whatever your opinions are on COVID, hopefully you haven't forgotten that heart attacks still exist, sickle cell still exists, strokes still exist, car accidents still happen, unless you've magically all stopped driving, car accidents still happen. So if care is delayed because of COVID, it's delayed for every type of patient. And if your loved one gets sick, that's a problem if there's going to be backups in the hospital. That's the way of viewing it. On your question of mortality, it varies widely depending on your age range and how sick the person is. So if you've got a young, healthy 4-year-old who gets COVID, very unlikely that he will have or she will have death from that, right? Very unlikely. As for long-term effects, that's a separate question and that we're still trying to suss out. But 4-year-olds, as you know, they get a fever, they get a cough, they're still running around. And that's similarly with COVID. If you're above 65, at least in the state of Arizona, if you're 65 and above and you're COVID positive, you have a 13% mortality. That is very high. 13% may make some people say, oh, 87% chance I'll do okay. Listen, if I tell you out of every 100 days, 13 of those days you may die, I don't think you'll like those odds. Most of us have lived far longer than 100 days, right? Imagine if out of every 100 days, 13 of them, somebody you knew really closely died. Now, of course, not everybody's above 65 and not everybody has COVID, but of the ones who are 65 and above and who get COVID, if you're going to say it's just a common cold, there's no common cold that kills 13% of a segment of a population. So mortality is actually quite a bit higher for COVID than it is for flu. And remember, flu was also bad. I don't want people thinking, oh, it's just the flu, as if flu is nothing. I've been saying, I've been honestly wearing masks for years. People are giving me weird looks for years. Because, I understand how viruses work. And maybe I'm a little bit of a germaphobe, I'll admit. When I get a cold, I get a man cold. I don't know if Mel and Charlie, if you guys have had a man cold before, but it's a phrase we know in emergency medicine, internal medicine. A man cold is a cold that a woman can also get, but a man takes it much harder because for whatever reason, actually there are basic science data to suggest this, that our immune response is different in men than in women. So there's some science behind a man cold, but I don't like man colds. I feel terrible. I don't like them. So I've been wearing masks for years, but COVID is even worse than the flu is already worse than the common cold, and COVID is even worse than that. Very high virulence rate, so it can infect a lot of people. If you're like, hey, listen, when my friend gets a cold, I don't, that's fine. COVID is different. And 2, much higher mortality rate as well. Like I said, if you're 65 and above, which a lot of people are, and I imagine a lot of people in Hawaii are. Arizona, we have a lot of retirees, we have a lot of snowbirds. I imagine Hawaii has a lot of people who in older age want to retire there. They're particularly at risk with a 13% mortality rate, at least in Arizona. And so that's a very high mortality rate, and that's another reason for why it's concerning.
Real quick, I don't know if Charlie, I don't think Charlie told you an email, but Charlie lost his brother to COVID.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
I did not.
My condolences.
The brother was in New York City, and that was kind of Charlie's motivation to move forward with this agenda that we have. But one of the things, Charlie took all of us on that road, and there were good days and bad days, and unfortunately, he finally passed away. But you brought up the point about the flu. I was just joking with Charlie today. I said, Charlie, where's all those guys that were beating us up that the flu was worse, that flu killed more people and blah, 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 blah. And all of a sudden, crickets. I don't hear them no more. Because why? Because the death rate of COVID has now surpassed flu in a very short period of time. So they went into hiding, which is good, because that made absolutely no sense from day one. What are your thoughts on that, as far as the people that still believe that the COVID is not as bad as the flu?
Well, if people thought that at the initial onset, I can understand why they were just making guesses. Like you make guesses on whether the Arizona Sun Devils are going to win their football game. Obviously, COVID is much more of a big deal than a football game. But if you still believe it's not as bad as the flu, then you've got some issues that I'm probably never going to connect with you with. At a certain level, you're like, how am I ever going to connect with this person? And so to have that thought process, if they are in a hole to a certain extent, great. Now, again, it's okay to make mistakes, right? It's okay to be wrong. Everybody makes mistakes. Even the top health experts make mistakes. But to have clear data and to deny them, it's funny that you use the word hole because I often said, I think the anti-vaxxers have gone into a hole. I've literally said this over the last however many weeks. I don't know what hole they've crawled into, but I hope they never come out. People who are anti-vaxxers were very dangerous from a community setting. It was a very selfish way of acting. There are some people, very few, who are allowed to take an exception to vaccines, but those are very few. You can't just say vaccines are bad. Like that's a terrible thing to say. And whatever those anti-vaxxers were seem to have gone into a hole. At least I hope, because I've heard rumblings of they're trying to crawl out, especially as the vaccine conversation has come back up with Moderna, AstraZeneca. There's a lot of vaccine conversations happening. Remember, vaccines aren't a cure. Vaccines are great, but they aren't a cure. So my fear was that people would rely too much on vaccines, and vaccines are great. But before I could even have that fear rise up, already there's some people having the sentiment of why take a vaccine when I can just take hydroxychloroquine, which is such a preposterous way of looking at it. It's so horrendous. And so if anti-vaxxers are coming out of the hole, that would be concerning. And it would also be concerning if people who think the flu is somehow still worse than COVID came out of the hole too. There are things that are worse than COVID, right? Tuberculosis kills a lot of people, malaria kills a lot of people. There are things that are worse than COVID, but here in the United States, compared to what our flu season faces, COVID has been far, far worse. There's a reason hospitals got so backed up, right? We get pretty busy in flu season, but we don't have refrigerated trucks coming to take our corpses away during flu season like we did during COVID. So, you can make whatever guesses you want, but if at this point, if you think we're faking refrigerated trucks coming to our hospitals, then there's something wrong with you, okay? We're not making that up. There's no advantage for us to do that. Obviously, it means we've been having so many deaths and so many backups that we need support and help.
Hey, Doc, I had a question here from a viewer that they've noticed that, deaths now are declining, not as much as before. And they wanted to know if you know of any treatment methods or what's causing the numbers to go down. I would presume people are taking more precautionary measures not to get sick, first of all. But when they do get sick, what kind of measures have been taken to maybe give them that edge to kind of fight this thing off? Because we've heard the horror stories that though the number rates of recovery might get high, it's that residual or the long-lasting medical issues that stuck with the patient after being released. So, what would those methods be? You know of any methods that's driving these numbers down once they get COVID and they're in the hospital?
So there's actually, it ends up there, those are two questions almost in one. One is on the death rates themselves. And remember, if New York got the first wave, and New York is the most populous city in the country, that even if the rest of the country has death rates go up, even if just New York is going down, it could make it seem like the whole country is going down. But that doesn't help you if you're in Hawaii, right? If New York goes down, it brings the whole country's rates down. Even if Arizona is going up and Texas is going up, it may seem like the country's average is going down. It turned out that Arizona, Florida, and Texas went up so high that we ended up having our death rate go back up again, okay? And so when you see a national rate go up and down, that doesn't necessarily mean it's doing that locally. Just because New York got better, that doesn't mean you're out of the bubble in Arizona, right? And as you saw, we in the Sun Belt got hit quite hard a few weeks after New York did. So with this particularly relevant to Hawaiians, if you see our numbers getting better, that doesn't mean we're in the clear. Your numbers could still potentially get worse. They may be getting worse even while the news is saying things are getting better nationally. So that's one caveat to keep in mind. As for whether people are getting better, there are some treatments that we have that aren't necessarily super groundbreaking or novel, but do seem to have helped. And the one I'm thinking of in particular is dexamethasone, which is for the ones who need respiratory support. The ones who need, oxygen support with BiPAP or intubation, giving them steroids seems to have a mortality benefit. And the reason I'm saying that's not super novel is because we've actually been doing that for patients who need respiratory support, whether for asthma or for COPD, in particular if they get ARDS. Where they're having fluid buildup in the lungs because of all the inflammation, we know that steroids can help some of those patients. Like I said, if any of your family members or loved ones or children have asthma, you've probably seen, at least when they have an exacerbation enough to go to the hospital, that sometimes a doctor will prescribe steroids to go home with, or if they're admitted, they'll get a dose of steroids. And so we know steroids can bring down inflammation. There are side effects, but in the case of a significant exacerbation, then steroids can help. And we noticed that when we used them in COVID patients, the ones who were particularly sick, the ones who needed oxygen, dexamethasone did help mortality. But remember, that doesn't necessarily, we know actually from that same paper that it didn't help people who didn't need oxygen support. So you don't just willy-nilly give it to people. Otherwise, you're going to start having side effects. And the majority of people don't end up needing ICU care, right? The majority of people, if I'm being honest, the majority of COVID people are able to manage it at home. But just because a majority are okay, that doesn't mean everybody will be, right? As you guys mentioned, Charlie has experienced this personally, and my condolences. I'm sorry that you had to go through that. And it's amazing to me that we've heard stories like this. We know people like this. We've seen people like this, and that people still let their guard down. I think part of it is this American mentality of, listen, if I get sick, something will magically cure me. But there are things for which we don't have magically a cure. The best treatment for COVID is just not getting it. It's just not getting it. And we have some great methods for that, whether that's hand hygiene or distancing or masks. If you have to be around people, it really is amazing how effective masks are in reducing disease transmission. It's far better than dexamethasone. It's far better than any drug we have. Honestly, it'd be better than even vaccines, I think, in terms of disease transmission. And so we have a lot of metrics and methods that we can do to try to prevent getting the disease. And the best treatment for COVID is just to not get it. Because as you said, it seems like there are long-term complications. And that's not surprising because flu, believe it or not, have long-term complications as well. That would seem completely unrelated. But it turns out that if you have the flu, you're much more likely in the next couple months to have a heart attack than just before the flu. So there's something going on there, right? And again, people don't talk about it necessarily very much because, heart attacks much more commonly happen regardless. But flu in and of itself significantly increases your risk of a major adverse cardiovascular event, heart attack, stroke, etc. So to think COVID wouldn't be like that is kind of crazy, especially given we've already seen long-term effects on autopsies, on lungs, on the heart, and even brain tissue. So just because, there might be a treatment that can help, remember, it's only for a subset of patients, but the best treatment is just to not get it, especially because even if you survive, you could have long-term effects.
Okay. Wow.
I did want to, a lot of people talk about the recovery numbers. I'm sure, I think the demographics in all the states are the same. You have a segment of the community that believes one thing, another percentage of the community believes another. And we have a lot of people that talk about, well, why don't you guys talk about the number of people that recover? Why are you guys always posting the numbers about the people that are positive and hospitalized? And, why don't you guys talk about the people that recover? The problem, Doc, is what I'm finding out now as we're hearing from people that have loved ones that have or had the COVID is the recovery. The fact that they're calling it recovery because they may have left the hospital. Some of these guys are struggling with some long-lasting, in fact, some lifelong medical ailments, whether it's respiratory or strokes. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So again, there are a couple points in there. You guys always ask these great questions, and I want to make sure, I don't botch the answer and I don't want to be a politician on your show. I want to answer the questions you're asking.
Yeah. So, and by the way, Doc, this is a free fall show. You can say how you want. You can feel free to let loose if you got to let loose. I gave everyone the warning. Our lieutenant governor swore on this show, which everybody thought was hilarious.
The governor swore?
A lieutenant governor.
Oh, okay. Well, fucking awesome. There we go. There's my first one. Yeah. All right. Great. Amazing. Thank you. Thank you for the green light. So there's the recovery aspect, which is, and then there's a long-term aspect. So as for recovery, you know what? Most of the time I get in my car and drive, I don't get thrown out the windshield and go careening to my death. But I don't go on the news every day saying, "Hey, listen, I drove to work today and didn't die. Amazing." So yeah, there's a reason we don't talk about the recovery because there's also a reason we don't talk about the fact that I made it to work without dying in a car accident. But does that mean I shouldn't wear a seatbelt? Does that mean we don't need speed limits? Like, of course, if we had no speed limits in the city of Phoenix, far more people would die. And I've seen in the ER when people don't wear seatbelts, they look a lot worse. That's if they're even alive compared to the one who wears seatbelts. And so, yes, there is a recovery, just like most people don't get in a car accident, just like a lot of people who do get in a car accident do survive. But the reason that doesn't make the news is because it's the death and the disability that we're concerned about, that we want to prevent. If everybody's healthy, there's no reason to talk about it, of course. Everything is kumbaya. Why would it be news? You know, that's nothing new. That's true of car accidents, guns, anything. The reason we talk about the death rates in particular with COVID is because unlike all the other illnesses, by the way, which also still exist, this created a huge spike in our hospital system and in our death rates. So there's a couple of things to look at. You know, the president often talks about, well, we're just testing more. And I'll grant him that if you test more, you'll have more cases. But that wouldn't explain the increased hospitalizations, and it also wouldn't explain the increased excess deaths. So if you look at, say, February through June of this year, and you compare it to February through June of last year, and the year before, and the year before that, we've got way more death, and that's in addition to COVID. So even if you account for all the COVID deaths we've had that we've tested for, there's at least 30% more deaths than that based on the data we have. So remember, I said there's a domino effect. If COVID causes a delay in care for COVID patients, it also causes that delay in non-COVID patients. So all those people are delayed. There are people who are staying home and just not wanting to go to the hospital because they're afraid. You know, I've got friends who say, you know, this patient came with a heart attack. He's been having it for 2 months. The cardiologists are being like, why are you waiting 2 months? And they're like, well, I don't want to come to the hospital. I just thought it was maybe reflux. And that's just one example of how many people potentially are delaying their care. So even though people are recovering, and that happens with all sorts of things, there are a lot of people dying, so much so that our death rates for the last 6 months are way higher than they were in the 6 months of 2019, 2018, 2017, 2016. So something is happening, right? And the hospitals, we are built to be able to handle what we're used to. So if you all of a sudden give us a spike, obviously it's going to get backed up. Obviously there will be delays. And even if people from COVID recover, how about the people from heart attacks, right? Who are delaying their care or getting delayed care because the hospitals are backed up. So that's always the thing I want to bring back to people is if for some reason you don't think COVID is dangerous, all the other things clearly still are. So much so that our data show we've got a much higher death rate in the last few months compared to previous years in those same months. So that part you can't deny. As for, you said something about recovery, I think you said long-term effects, correct. The other thing is even for the people who recover, a lot of people do have long-term effects. Now again, not everybody, but just today I saw a patient on telehealth actually who was calling in because she didn't want to expose herself, who got diagnosed with COVID on July 5th, was hospitalized for a couple of days. So 4th of July weekend was hospitalized for a couple of days. And now she's calling me a month later because she's still having symptoms. Her meds are running low. She's wondering, do I need to do something more? Do I need to get checked out again? Do I just need more meds for a little bit? And you know what I had to tell her was, listen, a lot of people have different recovery periods. Some people are fine in a couple of days. Some people are fine in a couple of weeks. There are people who've got symptoms for months and months. So now she's wondering, is something wrong? Or is this just my new lung capacity? Or will it just take a few months longer? And honestly, we don't know. By the time you're calling in a month after your hospitalization because you're still having symptoms, obviously something is up, right? And you guys have met multiple people or talked to multiple people like this who've had symptoms well beyond when they were diagnosed. And so one of the things we won't know for a while now is what are the true, because this is just a subacute phase. If you got COVID a month ago, whether it's chronic or not, we don't know yet. But a years from now, we'll know whether people had true long-term effects from COVID. And remember, we already know there are some from flu, so surely there will be some from COVID. So I don't want people thinking, oh, if I get it and I recover, I'm like Superman. Quite the opposite. Quite the opposite. Inflammation does cause damage. We know that. And in particular, people who are a little bit older, it can cause chronic conditions. So that's one of the things to be worried about, even for those who recover.
Well, Doc, when I finally got to take a look at a report of my brother's death, it was very odd because at the time we didn't know nothing other than, being told, Charlie, we're putting your brother, we're gonna have to put him on a dialysis. And I said, okay. And then that very same day they called back and they said, hey, something's happening. And they use all these medical terms, but basically it says the filters are gunking up. The blood is super thick. And that was the first time I ever heard that, because even the doctor who was telling me about this, said that they've never seen it before, not like that. So they knew it was COVID related. Just couldn't put their finger on that pulse. So I guess my question is, when somebody does have COVID, and maybe is it what you're saying is the the residual effects won't show up right away. It'll be long term thereafter, because some people feel I have recovered, and they go home and like 2 3 months they don't feel nothing. Then all of a sudden they start feeling, hey, maybe my capacity, like you said, the lung capacity is not, it's not up to stuff. I could play basketball, but something's happening now. Is this what COVID causes? That what you can see right now?
Yes. So as you know from personal experience, there's a variety of ways it can present. Your brother may have had coagulopathy, which we know might be existing. We know that there's some level of thrombosis that seems to happen with COVID,
Exactly.
and that's again, when you have inflammation, that can happen. But clots forming, blood being thick, is something that can very much happen with an immune response, and in particular with COVID. So, and again, my condolences. I mean, that's horrible. That especially that his case changed so quickly. So quickly it went from let's talk about dialysis to like, wait, we don't even know what's going on. Why is blood thickening? That's a scary place to be. And now there's some people who do somehow come out of that, who get that sick and somehow make it out. And we're very happy when that happens. But by the time they get that sick, it gets pretty hard to get them, out of the hospital. And for the ones who do make it out, right, that's right. You don't know what their chronic long-term effects will be. Now, some people will be fine, right? Some people have it kind of like a cold. And especially like younger people who get COVID. Again, we don't know their long-term effects, but it seems like they recover better, and they can go. It was almost as if they never had it. The way they feel afterwards is like, yeah, I feel good. I'm good to go to work, whatever the case may be. But there's definitely a significant fraction of people who do have long-term effects. And sometimes there's no way to know until you cut them open, right? But you're not going to cut open somebody who's alive by definition. If they recovered, sometimes it's hard to know what the long-term effects are like because you can't look at that lung tissue. You can't look at the heart tissue. And so you go based on symptoms. And if not having symptoms, great. But sometimes it is something as mild as, oh, when I'm running, I do feel a bit more short of breath. And you can tell yourself, well, it's because I haven't been exercising because I was sick recently. And maybe that is it. And maybe if you exercise enough, you'll make a full recovery. But the very fact that you can feel that, probably is a warning sign that something has happened. Maybe it was deconditioning from not exercising, but there's a decent chance that there's residual inflammation. And once that humoral response has happened and that viral response has happened to a disease, you don't know whether it's going to go away quickly and make you stronger, or whether part of it's going to last and how long it might last. Remember, we talked a little bit earlier in the show about how steroids can help. The reason steroids help is because they reduce the immune response, the inflammatory response. And you might say, wait, isn't the point of the body's immune response to help fight off an infection? Yes, it is. But the body often goes into overdrive because it will treat a foreign invader, whether it's a small virus or a huge parasite, whatever the case may be, it'll treat it similarly, attack, attack, attack. And in some cases, it goes into overdrive, and that's how you get things like blood thickening and clots and trouble breathing and fluid in the lungs, is because the body has gone into overdrive. So for those very sick patients, oftentimes what we do is try to suppress the immune response, tell the body, don't fight it as hard. So you can imagine for the people who do recover, maybe their bodies are now in overdrive mode, such that when they get a little bit of a bug or a little bit of inflammation, those memory cells are still there and potentially send them into overdrive mode, which can help fight off future infections, but can also give residual symptoms, whether it's shortness of breath or cough, etc. And so again, I keep saying this, the best treatment for COVID is just not getting it. And I hope people can remember that.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, well, we're going to save that segment for the last part because I think that'll be the most entertaining as far as how do we not get COVID. I did want to, last night we had a doctor on as well, an emergency room doctor from here. And one of the questions from the field was what they're seeing when someone comes in with COVID, the patients that are being treated for COVID. And typically when you have a virus, your white blood cells, the count goes up. And in COVID, in these cases, that's not happening. Are you seeing that in Arizona as well?
So white blood cell count can go up, but sometimes it doesn't go up. So leukocytosis is or an elevated white blood cell count is a fairly non-specific marker. And so a lot of things cause elevated white blood cell count, and we use it as a metric, right? If we're like kind of on the fence and the white blood cell count is high, we begin wondering, well, is something going on here that maybe we didn't suspect before? Well, listen, if somebody's coming in struggling to breathe, I don't care what his or her white blood cell count is, right? I'm concerned about his or her airway. But on the contrary, if somebody comes in looking like a peach and the white blood cell count is like 20, I begin thinking, yikes, is there a roaring infection here that I'm missing? Or even is there a malignancy? Is there maybe some sort of a cancer that we're screening for here? So white blood cell count can help. It does often go up in infections and immune responses, but it is only one marker of a disease process, and it's very nonspecific. It can be elevated for a variety of reasons, and sometimes it's not elevated even though the patient looks very sick. So I think every physician would say they don't treat just the number, they treat the patient. And that's what we try to do. Regardless of what that white blood cell count, how the patient looks is what's most important to us. Of course, somebody who has a higher, on average, somebody who has a higher white blood cell count is in general sicker than somebody with a lower blood cell count. But remember, it completely gets flipped in a chemotherapy patient, for example. For them, we're concerned about too low of a white blood cell count. So again, it's not just the number that matters, it's the number in context of the clinical picture. So all of that is what's relevant.
Okay. Well, Doc, I viewed what interests me the most when I got in contact with you is I saw you on CNN. And I think this question, you were answering it because there was somebody that uh, got on the steps of Congress and was touting the fact of hydroxychloroquine, zithromycin, and zinc. And then I heard you use the term wackadoodle. So I told Mel, you got to listen to this guy because I never heard that term before. And we have a lot of people here that they'll jump on our Facebook page and kind of like challenge us regarding hydroxychloroquine. That well, why is it being censored? Why is it being banned? What's your take on it, and how do you feel about it? Because it seems to be causing a stir right now. So what's your take on it?
So wackadoodle is a word for TV. I don't know where that came from, but it was, I guess, what came to mind. But quite honestly, I think she's a shithead. I mean, this is just like, this is not only is it completely wrong what she's saying, but it's dangerous. For anybody who's listening to somebody who talks about alien DNA and demon sperm, again, if you're listening to a person like that for your medical science, I'm not going to be able to help you. Okay. I don't believe in alien DNA in our drugs. I don't believe that the reason, I get people who come in all the time at our hospital with miscarriages, right? They come with miscarriages. They're really heartbroken because they lost a child or they think they're losing a child. Imagine like going to them and saying, Bob, you know what? Just stop having sex with demons and maybe you won't have a miscarriage anymore. Like, what a ridiculous thing. What a ridiculous thing. So, if somebody's touting something like that, obviously you shouldn't believe somebody like that when she's talking about hydroxychloroquine and not wearing masks. That Stella Manuel is completely, I think, honestly, psychotic. But to have the people that she was having behind her support her, it's just a disgrace to the white coat. Remember, the reason we wear white coats in medicine, by the way, is because we used to all be quacks, okay? Doctors were barber surgeons. They were putting leeches on people. They were doing all sorts of hocus pocus. And scientists who were the one who were advancing the field of medicine. They were doing experiments, finding cures, and being able to listen, you need to use data and do experiments to know what's better for people. And when medicine decided, you know what, we got to stop doing quack medicine. We got to be professional. We got to do what's evidence-based. Then we started wearing the white coat because we wanted to tell people, listen, we're using science and data to make our decisions, not just revelation from God on what we think is best. That's why we wear the white coat. The scientists gave it to us. And the reason it's now affiliated with doctors is because we took it from scientists to say, we are going to provide you evidence-based care, scientific care. So for somebody like her, who is a complete quack and wackadoodle, to be wearing a white coat and have other colleagues wearing white coats on the steps is a complete disgrace to our whole field, our whole specialty, and how we've actually been able to help patients, which is through science. And for somebody like her to say that, despite the weird things that have happened in our country, and weird's putting it mildly, I mean, you guys know about the Tuskegee studies, right? Where they're basically experimenting on colored people, completely horrendous. And for her to compare us with the Germans who let the Nazis kill Jews is so appalling, so preposterous. The code of ethics that came from the Nuremberg trials was precisely so that people, in particular doctors, would use ethical treatments that were evidence-based, not just experiment on whomever they want, like she's doing on her patients with hydroxychloroquine, okay? You need a trial. She can't make fun of double blind. There's a reason we do trials. There's a reason our cancer outcomes are as good as they are. It's because we've done studies, well-controlled studies, to be able to say this drug works and this one doesn't. Now, the thought process behind hydroxychloroquine was a potentially interesting one. We talked earlier a couple times now about the immune response and how sometimes it goes into overdrive. That's actually one of the things hydroxychloroquine does, is it sort of suppresses the inflammatory response. So there was a thought process that maybe for some people it could help. It wasn't an unreasonable thought that maybe for some people it could help, but you need to have evidence to show whether it works or not. And the best trial we have right now, which is an actual randomized controlled trial, not revelation from aliens or from demons or from God, an actual scientific trial, believe it or not, where they randomized patient to hydroxychloroquine versus placebo and standard care, it turned out that hydroxychloroquine actually had poorer outcomes. Does that mean nobody will benefit? Of course not. Some people will, but more people will be harmed. And that's coming from the data, that's coming from science. That's the reason people are alive today, is from data and science that is used in medicine. So if you want to just forget all data, forget all science, just have revelation from God, well then, you know what, go back to the year 1200 and fight the bubonic plague, okay? I can't really help you. But under the assumption that you believe chemotherapy helps cancer, under the impression that you assume surgeons help with appendicitis of pulling out the appendix, all of this, which was done using data, then on that same assumption, hydroxychloroquine is probably more harmful than helpful, and it's definitely not a cure. It's definitely not a cure. There's no question about that. Nobody says that. And so I think it's very dangerous to say that, you know what, well, I'll just use hydroxychloroquine. There are much better treatments, in my opinion. And I know you said you want to save that for the end of the show, in particular, preventing disease transmission in and of itself. But hydroxychloroquine is not the answer. There may be a subset of patients for whom it helps. And there's a reason the drug exists, right? It clearly helps some people with certain conditions, but COVID isn't it. That's the short of it.
Okay.
I sorry for chuckling, but one of our viewers put up a little whatever emoji or whatever of this laughing child, like cracking up laughing, and I shouldn't be looking at the comments right now because this is kind of a serious moment, but
yeah, I can't see it. I'm on Zoom right now.
Yeah,
Eyes on the prize here.
Thank
But,
God.
send her an
God.
emoji back for me. Yeah.
Doc, Kauai. I mean, Hawaii. We're kind of at crossroads right now. So I'm just gonna lay this out, and I'm just curious to hear your take, and it's gonna include a few things, but. We went from our first exposures, and then we kind of flattened the curve pretty quick. We shut everything down, locked it down, quarantine inter-island travel, quarantine mainland travel. We started opening up. We started opening up bars and churches and stores and everything else for restaurants. Our numbers right now is I mean, and for us, it's nowhere near what you guys are seeing on the mainland, but we're spiking now. We've had more cases this month than we've had in the entire 4 months prior. And it's climbing every day. We have our governor is looking at lifted the inter-island quarantine. In other words, people can travel inter-island freely right now, even if they're coming from Honolulu, which is our hotspot. He's planning on opening up the mainland quarantine, lifting that on September 1st. He's thinking about letting the kids go back to school on August 17th. I don't want this to be political, Doc. I don't know how you're going to answer this. I just want to know, what do you think, as our numbers are spiking and we know that the infection potential of this virus is quite high. We're seeing clusters of, one person infecting 30 people, 40 people. You think it's wise, because we are an island state and we have the Pacific Ocean right now and the quarantine in place, even though a lot of our visitors sneak out and break quarantine, for the most part, we're keeping our numbers somewhat down, but many of us are afraid that once we open up the mainland quarantine, we're going to get thousands of visitors arriving every day. Do you think that is a wise thing to do now as our numbers are rising?
Absolutely not. And listen, I've got a very close friend who very much wants to go to Hawaii, and she'll be really upset if she hears this is what I said. But there is no reason for a state who's doing better than the rest of the country to try to dilute the work they've done by letting in idiots from the mainland. Because that's the people who's going to come, right? It's not going to be somebody who's very gung-ho on distancing and, staying away from people. The people who are going to jam-pack like sardines into a plane to come to Hawaii are the very ones who aren't following distancing guidelines. You don't want the worst of the worst from the mainland coming to your islands. Listen, I want to come to Hawaii. I would love to see it someday. And I know a lot of your industry is based on ecotourism. or tourism in general. But I'm sure the residents, the actual Hawaiians, there's actually true Hawaiians living in Hawaii that sometimes people forget about. We need to care about them as well. And I'm sure that they don't want to get sick because so many other people want to visit. Again, the economy is an important thing. I get it. But we've seen this in multiple other countries when they austerely closed down their economies. They took a hit for a few weeks, but then they bounced back. And people in Taiwan's not that far from you guys, right? Compared to New York, Taiwan, is actually much closer to you guys. They're at baseball games right now. They're literally at baseball games watching their ball players, okay? People in South Korea are eating inside restaurants, not outside. They're eating inside of them. And that's because it's such an austere, strict shutdown, and it worked. And we've seen this in multiple cities, multiple countries. We've seen it even for places that have gone back and forth, where they've closed down, opened up, closed down, opened up. You see what happens. When you open up, there are more cases, and when you close down, there are fewer ones. Now, listen, if everybody on Hawaii is a saint and everybody follows quarantine metrics when they arrive there, then probably you'll be okay. But as I think I was looking at one of your guys' Facebook pages, honestly, if I'm not mistaken, but somebody responded somewhere, maybe it was an article, somebody responded being like, who would travel to Hawaii only to be stuck in a hotel for 14 days? Obviously, the people traveling there are going to break quarantine. And I totally agree with that. Now, I know you guys have pitched the idea of a resort bubble, and that could potentially work. The NBA bubble is working for them. But if you're going to tell people, hey, listen, come, you can stay in a hotel and voluntarily stay there for 2 weeks, the very people who are willing to do that are probably the people who are going to sneak out, right? And that puts other Hawaiians at risk. And what that does is it makes it even farther back before you can truly open up. So I would say it's probably a poor idea to let anybody in willy-nilly. If you have a strict quarantine, my wife was in Doha for the last couple of years, and she was there when the quarantine hit. They were tracking all of them. There were significant fines if you left your apartment unnecessarily or your home unnecessarily. And everybody who did leave needed an app tracking them. Now, in America, they would say, well, that's invasion of privacy and this and that, all sorts of things that people talk about. But in these countries, they were very strict about not allowing people to congregate unless it was absolutely necessary. Maybe we can't get that strict here, but if you're going to say, hey, listen, let's let the mainland come here, let's put it this way. Japan is now thinking of letting their people come to Hawaii to visit. If Japan finds out that Hawaii is going to let mainland Americans come, pretty quickly, Japan's going to say to its citizens, you're not allowed to go there because we know what's going to happen. You guys had a record-breaking day today for number of cases, right? Far more than Arizona's ever had in a day. You guys had a record-breaking case today, and maybe magically that will get better. But remember, not only is that bad in and of itself, but your positivity rate has been going up. It was a number that was actually looking quite good. Your guys' positivity rate was actually phenomenal. And I was trying to look into why, and I saw what your governor had done, what your politicians had done in terms of sort of locking down the state, which I didn't even know because I was so busy dealing with Arizona. But clearly it worked. Your positivity rate was phenomenal. But your positivity rate is kind of like a mountain. It's ascending rapidly, and that's the first metric for when things might get bad. And today you saw one example of that where you had basically, I think it was 207 new cases. That to go from, having very few to, as Charlie mentioned, maybe 20 to 60 a day, to now having 207, that along with the positivity rate going up, these are bad signs. And so to say, listen, we might want to open back up, this is probably not the time to do it because whatever little happened where people were maybe relaxing the guard a little, you've already seen the spike in numbers. I don't think opening up is a good idea. At the very least, opening up to a country that clearly hasn't handled the pandemic very well.
Our positivity rate was, we were typically about 1.82% early on. Now we're running anywhere from 5.8 to 7.2%. That's a number to me. What is that to you? Is that dangerous?
Yeah. So again, from an Arizona perspective, I'm like phenomenal, because we were above 20 for many, 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 many weeks. But remember, the threshold that we talk about is below 5%. And you go to any experts' guidelines, whether the WHO or the CDC, or if you don't believe those guys, you can go to Johns Hopkins, you can go to the IHME, you can go to Ashish Jha, you can go to any public health expert you want. And the metric we say is below 5% is probably the level which you can consider, well, can we start changing things around a little bit? Have we done a good enough job? So when you're at 1 or 2%, awesome. You guys are doing great. Now you're above the 5% metric, and if anything, rising. And so that is concerning. And maybe it'll go back down. Maybe, but if people don't take, strict precautions, then it's really troubling because remember, humans can only do so much on their own. People can do only so much on their own. There's a reason we have elected representatives, and you can feel the way you want about our civics and our democracy. But the short of it is the executive branch has the ability to declare an emergency. If this isn't an emergency, I don't know what is. And we've shown, our state has shown that clearly people listen to their elected leaders. When in April, the governor said, stay at home, people did. Of course, some people didn't, but people did as much as they could. And when he said, listen, I think we can release a little bit, people took that as a sign of, let off the brakes completely. And so people, I can talk as much as I want. Mel, Charlie, you guys can talk as much as you want. And you've been doing that. And I'm really glad you guys are getting a message out. But ultimately, if a politician says, this is a hoax, or if the governor says, we can open up again, well, people will respond to that message because people want to open up. They're waiting to hear, yes, you're free to go. And even if it's not science backed, if somebody says, listen, we can open up the economy a little bit, it won't be just, even if the politician says, hey, continue to maintain your distance as much as possible, but we're going to open up the economy a little bit. People view that as a signal as, sweet, I can do what I want, even though they're told to continue distancing and continue wearing masks. So unless there's a big cultural shift where everybody wears masks and people avoid public settings for a long period of time until this pandemic is over, to say, listen, let's open up and let's people have their individual liberties and let people make their own decisions, probably won't work. And we can see that in multiple states that have already tried that. We can see that even in sports right now. Look at the difference between the NBA and the MLB. Okay, I don't think national basketball players are necessarily that much more moral than national baseball players, maybe, but I don't think there are any data to suggest that the morals in basketball players are totally different from the morals in baseball players. But there's a difference in how the MLB has had its COVID cases recur versus the NBA. And the big difference is the NBA is in a bubble and the MLB is traveling. And humans will be humans. As multiple experts say, if you put a 24-year-old single guy on a plane to another city, well, to imagine he's going to stay quarantined while being a good-looking professional athlete is probably being optimistic, right? And similarly, if you just tell Hawaiians, listen, stay at home, even though you live in paradise, what do you think is going to happen, right? And if you open it up to mainland America, who everybody's dream here is to get to Hawaii, right? Everybody here wants to go to the best state in the country. People want to get jobs there. People want to retire there. If you tell them, listen, you can come back, just maintain your distance, what do you think is going to happen? Okay, it doesn't take a genius to realize people are going to cough on each other. Nobody's going to maintain quarantine. They're going to infect each other. In fact, you're going to get the worst of the crop because the very people who don't believe in distancing are the ones who are going to get on that plane and fly to your state. Do you want that in your state? I don't think so.
Yeah, we don't. What about schools, Doc? I know real quick, schools, I'm not sure what the educational climate is up in Phoenix, but a lot of our parents are afraid, our teachers are afraid because of the rising numbers. I think 2 months ago, people would have been all right. And yet the schools, everything was shut down 2 weeks ago. 2 or 3 months ago. And now as the numbers are climbing, we're starting to open up. What's your thought on schools and kids and as far as COVID?
So a couple of things. For one, I wouldn't listen to just a politician about schools. I said this in a show before, but you wouldn't have a car mechanic take out your gallbladder. You probably shouldn't have just a politician tell you whether your kids are safe at school or not. Remember, our federal administration, this White House, has said we want to defund public education and give it to private schools. And that same administration now wants to pack them back like sardines into schools. I'm a little skeptical that they have the best interest of kids in mind. Okay, they also turn a blind eye every few weeks. You guys have been in this field, right? You guys have done this work. You guys know about shootings, whether in school or otherwise. If a president turns a blind eye to shootings, whatever your politics are, by the way, if he turns a blind eye to shootings, I'm not sure he's the guy to turn to for when to open schools, especially when he's the one talking about defunding public schools. Again, it doesn't take a genius to realize, he's probably not the guy, okay? So my first point is don't listen to just the politicians. They may have some good ideas, but probably they're people with better ideas. For example, health experts or doctors like pediatricians, or God forbid, asking a teacher who nobody seems to want to ask them what their opinions are, right? My wife's a teacher. She's been in Arizona her whole life. She has colleagues. Let's just say a lot of them are very nervous about going back. I'm not saying teachers are only people to listen to. You got to listen to everybody, but they should have an opinion when it comes to going back to school as well. And we have certain metrics on which schools should be able to open. Like remember, a one-size-fits-all approach won't work. If you're in a hotspot like Phoenix has been, obviously what you do with schools is going to be different from middle of nowhere Wyoming. If you got very few cases, very few positivity, and your kids in Wyoming want to go back to school, it probably is okay to open up there, in particular if you can distance and have enough resources. But if you're in a state like mine, where we rank 51st in the country for teacher-student ratios and for teacher funding, we're the worst in the country, and we're in a hot spot, Well, that's a bad combination. You're probably not going to magically have the money to be able to have more school buses to distance the kids, to have bigger classroom settings, to have more teachers, to have more school nurses, to have fewer days. If you're going to magically somehow come up with the resources, then fine, but I very much doubt it, and in particular in a hotspot. So usually what people say is you need it to be below a certain level of cases per 100,000. And if you're above that level, probably too much community transmission to open up schools. If you're below that level, it could be okay if you have distancing, if you have masks, if you have good ventilation, if you have good resources, if there's a way to protect the teachers and the kids' families and the staff. So there are a lot of ifs, but the first metric is what is your community transmission rate? And I do think that, you know, every area needs its own plan. Like I said, middle of you know, Wyoming shouldn't necessarily be susceptible to what, you know, Phoenicians are doing, right? If they have the ability to go back to school, then maybe it's okay. There's a district in Idaho that has been able to do distancing in its schools, but a place like Phoenix can't. And I imagine a place like Honolulu, it might be harder there, for example, compared to a remote area of the island. So that's a very tough call. And the other thing to keep in mind is if you have somebody who's elderly at home or immunocompromised, then that kid can bring disease to the home, right? So that's another thing to consider is if you're sending your child to school, even if the child maybe will do okay, you also have to consider whom he or she will potentially see when he or she does come home. But before we even get into that, the question the schools have to ask themselves is our community transmission rate low enough? And on top of that, do we have the ability for our students to distance and our teachers to distance? And then you can take the next steps from there. So long-winded answer, but it is a complicated issue. And I think it takes more than just listening to politicians on it. I think there are a lot of experts who can speak on it as well.
I think one of the real quick, just so that to give you a little understanding of how Hawaii, I'm sure you probably know this, we're a different cultural, our state is cultural. You know, the Hawaiians, the native Hawaiians, as well as all the, you know, we're all here because of the plantations. We all here, we live in multi-generational households. We have the young and the old, all, you know, in many cases because of the economy and the price of the cost of living, we have numerous families living in one house. So that child does come home to a 60, 70, 80-year-old grandma or great grandma. I mean, that's just how it is here. And that's a concern. We've always said, Charlie has been talking about this virus doesn't live on a timeline. So we shouldn't be setting benchmarks based on dates. We shouldn't be saying, we're going to open the schools on August 17th. We're going to open up travel on September 1st. Thank you for saying what you said. Again, Charlie, we don't know what these guys are going to say. They could come and completely be totally opposite, but exactly what we've been saying. You use the benchmarks, the medical benchmarks. You use your transmission rates or whatever you may use, and that's what's lacking right now. So thanks, Doc, for that. Charlie.
Yeah, you know, Doc, I had a question here. Someone's asking about we're not getting enough info about what to do if you potentially been exposed, like in a restaurant. Help an island nation out of a sequence of social responsibility plan of action? Question mark. And you know, if I were to look at that, I would say one, you got to feel the symptoms first, right? Because if you go into a restaurant, you don't know if you're exposed or not. It just doesn't happen. So probably you start to react when you start to feel some symptoms, correct?
So yeah, so for one, if you get symptoms after an exposure, you begin wondering, of course, is this COVID? And if you're in a state like mine, anybody who has cold, influenza-like illness, as we call it, pretty much all of them come back positive COVID for me. Those numbers are beginning to go down, but I was having almost no negative tests just a couple weeks ago. Even last week when I was testing people, anybody who seemed like flu was always COVID. So it depends on where you are as well. Sometimes it is just allergies or dust or maybe even a cold, but the main bug going around right now is COVID. And so that is one of the concerns. If you get symptoms, could it be that in particular with an exposure? But remember, there are also people who are asymptomatic or pre-symptomatic. You know, there's some people who don't have the symptoms right now, but will maybe a week from now. So just because you don't have the symptoms now, it doesn't mean you don't have COVID. You could still have COVID, right? And so in terms of the next steps, for one, I would say probably going to restaurants is not a good idea. I don't want, you know, like to poo-poo this person. The point isn't to judge here, right? I'm, you know, whatever. There's plenty of things I do really badly myself. You know, I have an anger, I have a temper tantrum, whatever. There are things I can get better about too. But the point is for future moves, I think going to a place with other people where you don't need to be there, probably best to avoid it. If you want to go to a restaurant, you can sit outdoors away from people. That's probably fine. But if you can be indoors around people, the very fact that I heard that somebody can be exposed in a restaurant, well, that's the whole reason for why we don't want people going to restaurants, is to avoid exposure. So if you can go to a restaurant without exposing yourself to anyone, whether symptomatic or otherwise, that's the ideal situation. And remember, what we mean by distancing is at least 6 feet, though I would say even more. 6 feet is the bare minimum. And then also amount of time. If you just happen to pass someone in a quick second, you're probably not going to just catch COVID like that, right? But if you're standing close to the person, especially if it's within 6 feet, but even 7, 8, and you're repeatedly talking back and forth, and there's laughing happening, and B sounds and P sounds, which I'm enunciating purposely because that's what makes saliva fly, that makes it much more likely to have COVID spread. And so if you're in a restaurant and the next person is 30 feet away, you're probably fine, even if that person has COVID. But if you're close enough to know that you've been exposed, you were sitting too close. And you presumably shouldn't be sitting that close to anybody in a restaurant or otherwise. And so if you're going to go to a restaurant, make sure you're 30 feet away. Maybe that's an excessive measure, but really far away. And so far away that there's probably no restaurant that can actually open up that safely. But once you have been exposed, the real question is, were you close enough to have true exposure? And also, what's the next step? And part of that depends on whether you have testing available or not. And here's the two-sided part about testing, right? We all talk about we need more tests, we need more tests. Yeah, I agree, we need more tests. But if you test positive and still go clubbing, it doesn't help anyone, right? And similarly, if you test negative and you decide, listen, I'm immune, I can do whatever I want, that's very dangerous. So I don't want people just relying on the test. If you have symptoms, you need to isolate. And that's true before COVID, that's true during COVID, it'll be true after COVID. Flu still does kill people, even the cold kills people, right? You don't want to infect an 80-year-old grandma with flu, and you definitely don't want to infect her with COVID. So regardless of what the test results would be, if you have symptoms, avoid those people. And during this pandemic, we're saying even if you don't have symptoms, avoid people. So I guess in terms of the next steps, what I would say, if you can get tested, fine, that's great if you can do it without getting exposed. But remember, your management should be somewhat similar regardless, which is regardless of what the test result would show, whether you get it or not. If you have symptoms, quarantine. And if you don't have symptoms, distance, wash hands, and wear masks. And that's the case regardless of whether you were exposed or not. And so in terms of management, I think it ends up being the same regardless of whether you were exposed or not. But remember, what I want to reiterate is if we're distancing, then hopefully there's no exposure happening anyway.
Okay, outstanding.
Awesome. We had one of our doctors from Honolulu, Dr. T. He's he one of the doctors from the Doctors of Waikiki. He was on our show a few nights ago, and he talked about exactly what you saw. They've been testing all of their patients that came in for flu-like symptoms. All of them tested positive for COVID. That's scary, and that's within the last week, and that we had him on the show. And he was saying it's been like that for several weeks now. So we know that that's so scary the way you put it. Most of the people that are coming in with symptoms are positive. It's not influenza. It's not the flu. So I know, Doc. We told you 1 hour. We're at 1 hour, man. I wish we could keep you on forever. You go check the page, the Facebook page, so you can see the comments. You're gonna be blown away. But I want to give you the last shot. I heard you talking, I think it was CNN, one of your newscasts, about driving home and seeing people not wearing masks, driving home and seeing people not social distancing, you coming a day off of your clinic or the emergency room, watching people die in emergency rooms, only to drive home and see people totally disregard the safety procedures for all of us individuals to do. And I kind of wanted you to share that with our people, with our people that are watching right now, to let them know what it's like working in a hospital, that you see so many tragedies, and then why are people not listening to the simple rules of wear a damn mask, stay away from each other, wash your hands. I just wanted you to share what's on your heart about that. And whatever else you want to cover, Doc, we'll give you the last however long you want.
Well, I appreciate it. Yeah, it's frustrating to do something that you feel is futile, and I'm sure you guys felt like that many times during your career, right? Where you're trying to do the right thing, you're trying to help people, and you're almost literally shooting yourself in the foot. And you're like, what's going on here? I mean, we're trying to help, we're trying to save people, and then there's so many people who are disregarding it, and so it's not good to make people, whether in your profession or mine, feel like what they're doing may be futile. Now, I realize that it's not futile. I realize there are people we help. But once you start getting that sentiment, obviously it builds some resentment and anger too, because there are so many people who are getting sick, so many people who are dying. And remember, this is in a setting where people can't see their loved ones. They can't go to a funeral if they die in a lot of cases. And if they're sick in a hospital, they can't even say goodbye. So we're having to hand them telephones, we're having to give them iPads to say goodbye to their loved ones because they may never talk to them again. So that's a horrible situation where imagine being that person who's saying goodbye from a hospital bed, or even being the family member of that person who can't say goodbye to your mother or your father. You have to do it over the phone, if you're even that lucky to be able to do that, because you can't go and be a visitor in the hospital. And imagine that scenario happening, which it is repeatedly, and then seeing people going to restaurants, going to clubs as if everything is okay. I'm not saying one person's dying should make the whole world end, but when there are people who can't even visit their loved ones in a hospital because of how bad a pandemic is, it is very selfish, in my opinion, very selfish to go out and pretend like nothing is happening, that everything is okay, that I'm going to party even if other people are getting sick, because those people can't even visit their loved ones in nursing homes. They can't even visit their loved ones when they're dying. So at the very least, it would be nice if people had some empathy, some solidarity with the people who are losing loved ones and saying, well, at the very least, I won't go clubbing. Okay. At the very least, I won't go out in big congregate settings. And on top of that, like you said, washing hands, which everybody should be doing, distancing as much as possible, and wearing masks. Like, masks are so easy. One of the things I brought up in previous interview, maybe you saw it, but one of the things I brought up is that there really are a lot of great things about our country. And I don't want people to forget that. I mean, you guys are in Hawaii, so whatever your political opinions are, I'm sure there's a little bit of affection for our former president. But if we in our country can elect a black guy as president of a Western nation, a guy with a Muslim name, no less, right? He had all the wrong things, the wrong color, the wrong name, everything. But we can be such a great country to elect somebody like him as president. No other Western nation has done that. No other Western nation is even close. So whatever your opinions are, whether you agree with his politics or disagree with them, we did it. We elected that guy, right? There are things that are very difficult that we can do. There are things that are very difficult that we can do. Wearing masks is so easy compared to that. The other example I've used is ambulances, right? When we were a couple of years ago, we were driving on the road with my mom, an ambulance came, we pulled over to the side and we pulled over, and then, after the ambulance passed, we started getting back on the road. But before we did, my mom just kind of sat there and said, what an amazing country where everybody pulls over for an ambulance. And my jaw dropped because, of course, you pull over for an ambulance. What else would you do? I was born here, raised here. I don't know. Of course, that's what you do. She's like, that's not how it was where I grew up. She's an immigrant. And where she grew up, the ambulance just gets stuck in traffic. And if the patient dies, the patient dies. But over here, everybody pulls over. Nobody asks, is the patient a Democrat or Republican? Nobody says, it's my right to be on the road. Who's this ambulance to tell me otherwise? Everybody, even if they're running late for work, everybody, for a stranger, pulls over to the side and lets the ambulance go through. And we take that for granted, but that's an amazing thing about this country. As my mom said, it's a miracle of this country. If there are things like that we can do for a stranger, wearing a mask is so easy. It's so easy, and it so significantly prevents disease transmission. And on top of that, it can make us go back to semi-normal so much more quickly. We have every reason in the book to do it. The fact that people aren't is just ironic. They're shooting themselves in the foot. And like I said, so much of it is selfish too. Please, people, as much as I sound negative and pessimistic, we really are better. We really are better. Take it from somebody whose mother and father immigrated here for the virtues of this country. They tell me that we're better. I know we're better. We can do this. We've done much harder. We can do this. Let's just do it.
Woo! Woo! People are saying they want you back, Doc. They want you back. People are saying they want you back. People are saying it's the best show ever. How the hell are we going to top this, damn it? Charles, how are we going to top this? I don't think
We're going to top this by one being very humble and saying thank you from the bottom of my heart. Thank you for, when I reached out to you, you didn't know who you were communicating with, and I just took a chance, and you gave me your email because that's what you check more often, and it was from there. And I'm so glad that I watched that segment when you were talking to the reporter about, like I said, the wackadoodle, because I was kind of entrenched in the whole hydroxychloroquine issue, and just to hear just an honest doc shooting honestly, I mean, I was very impressed. So I would like to say to you, Doc, thank you so much. I mean, it's a pleasure to meet you, and it was a pleasure to hear you tonight. In fact, one comment was you were answering without even having questions posed to you, and they said, and this one person said, That's how you know the doctor knows his stuff, and you can read it when you go back on his page. That's what they're saying. They say this guy is actually answering before we can even throw the question out, because you know your stuff. And we've had many good guests on our show. We've had the head of the International Institute Vaccine Institute from South Korea, who was a Hawaii boy, Dr. Jerome
Yeah.
Kim. He
Big
was
deal. He
on.
was a big deal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he was on. But it's a caliber of people that we bring on, like yourself, because we need that. There's so much Hawaii is. There's so much conflict going on with trying to understand, because everybody, like you said, everybody wants their freedom. We live in paradise. Want to go to the beach, but sometimes we have to sacrifice in order to allow people to live out their lives as expected, not to shorten their lives because they catch in a virus. But you brought a lot of things home, Doc, and I just like to say thank you very very much, and to our viewers out there. I hope what you took away from tonight was something that's worthwhile. It has, all the merits. We told you it was going to be an eventful night, and just by the numbers, right now we have 316 views now. But I know that when we close out, it'll be the numbers will be high, and I'll get them for you and I'll shoot them over to you. So to the viewers, thank you so much for joining us, and again, Doc, thank you very very much.
Thank you guys both for having me. I was honored to be on. I'm really proud of you guys. Not that you need that. That's not that that's why you're doing it, but for doing the work you're doing. Because honestly, I think people want to hear from people like yourselves. They see plenty of people like me on TV ranting and raving or whatever. And it can be, I think it can be mixed messages. Even doctors can get confused. So you can imagine people who don't know the science behind COVID can get even more confused. So I appreciate you giving them the message. And I'm always happy to answer any questions for anybody. If they want to ask me as much as I can, I'm happy to answer. And I'll be the first to say I've been wrong about things before. My plan was to be in Europe this summer, traveling with my wife. And clearly that didn't happen. So I predicted that wrong. But listen, you only can go with what you have in the moment. And we have a lot more data now. And I really do think we can do this. Other countries have done it. Countries that are not that far from Hawaii have done it. So we can too. And I'm hoping for the best for you guys as a state, just like I'm hoping for the best for our country. And the final thing I want to say is my condolences again to you, Charlie. I lost my father 14 years ago, and I still wear his lapel pins on my sleeves every day when I go to work. And I was lucky enough to be there when he gave his last words when I was 22 years old. And you had to say basically goodbye without even being able to talk to him by being many thousands of miles away. And so all of us know somebody who has died, and it's a horrible moment, no matter what the person's age is. And I want people to understand the empathy that losing a loved one is always traumatic, and that this pandemic has taken a lot of lives beyond just COVID. And so I'm hoping that people will understand your story, understand other people's story, because I can throw all the facts at you that I want, right? I can throw all the facts at you that I want, and I'm really glad for the people who want to listen to them. But it really hits home personally for a lot of people, and it did for you. So I very much appreciate what you and Mel are doing, trying to get the message out. And I think the thing that for me makes me most wanting to distance isn't even the data or the health experts. I'll be honest, it's not. It's when I'm driving to work and I hear a radio story about somebody who lost a loved one and couldn't be there or couldn't be at the funeral. And it's just heartbreaking that there are people who are losing loved ones, can't even be there to say goodbye. And that is what makes me say, listen, I'm going to do my utmost to distance and to stay away from people and do hand hygiene and to wear masks. Not the data, but the personal trauma it afflicts on people. And so that much more that I appreciate what you guys are doing, getting the message out. And I'm always happy to answer any of the questions anytime. So thank you for having me on.
Thank you.
Well, Doc, thank
No?
you very much. Just want to couple of the comments. Tell him we have plenty aloha for him. Mahalo kauka, which is Hawaiian for doctor. You are well appreciated by our viewers. There's just nonstop thank you or mahalo is what we say in Hawaii. Tomorrow you can tell all your colleagues mahalo. Everybody knows aloha. Not too many people know mahalo. That just means thank you. But I echo all what Charlie said. We bring on a lot of people. We bring on a lot of doctors, and I gotta say, you're right in line with what everybody's saying. All the experts are saying the same thing, and we sometimes we do. Charlie and I, we get frustrated. We do a post show, not critique, but we chat after the show is done. And I know it's after 11 o'clock for you, and again, I appreciate that. But we always kick ourselves in the ass. Like, hey, what can we do next? What more can we do? We've brought so many people on the show, and people still refuse to take this seriously. And I'm hoping that you came across not so much of the angry doctor, but a very compassionate, empathetic, knowledgeable, skilled doctor who is in the trenches and knows what he's talking about. And I'm hoping that more people gravitate to doing the right thing. One thing that we do know, and we got this straight from people in the legislature, is a lot of our state leaders watch this show after it goes, after it's live. They don't do it when it's running. So I'm hoping that the governor and the lieutenant governor and all of these decision makers will watch this one and pay attention to what you said, because again, you're in a hot zone. You deal with this stuff, and it's hot and heavy, and I only can hope that they take heed to what you got to say, man. I don't know what else to say other than thank you, Doc. You stay safe. God bless you. And we send our aloha to everybody in Arizona, especially Phoenix, where you're at. Hug your wife for us and tell them that we appreciate her sharing you with us tonight on this very late night for you. So thank you, Doc.
Well, thank you guys. Mahalo back. My wife says hello back, and we are looking forward to being on the other side of the pandemic and visiting your beautiful state, and you two in particular in person. I look forward to that. God willing, we'll get there.
I tell you this, based on the comments, we're going to have a nice little luau for you when you and your wife gets to Hawaii, whenever that may be. And I can promise you that will happen. So thank you, my friend. Hope we can get you back on the show again at some point. We'll be in touch.
Sounds good. Thank you, guys. Stay safe. Until next time.
Hello, can you do this real quick? Can you? That's a
There
shaka.
you go.
There you go. Hello, everybody. We love you guys. God bless. Take care. We'll see you guys tomorrow night, 7 p.m. Aloha.